So there are situations like this. You have to just be mindful that people need different amount of time to cope with. And even in the West, in global markets, sometimes in the Asian market, I have found in projects, say for example, in Thailand or Vietnam, for instance, people actually openly said to me that unfortunately, okay, how come the UAT is not ready? It's like, okay, during that time, we didn't actually respond in time, but we're going to do it properly now. They can't chase up to that. And the project is like rushing, right? And our pressure is change. Let's get it through. So it is us that are really important in change. And in fact, I believe all leaders who have to look in front, but we need to look at the back as well and bring people to the right pace. It's not easy across geographies.
And I really like that idea of we have to look back, because from me personally, it's not only looking back to see who might be, sort of lagging behind, but I also like to look back to see what was the last experience for people. And if it wasn't good, let me start the conversation early about what could make the experience different for people.
Yes. Yes, I think that's really important.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And then there's some great comments in the chat, about echo chambers, managers and so on being echo chambers. People just want to see boxes checked off without really thinking about both the health of the team and also the quality of the deliverables. So I think that is really, really important.
And questions as well about tactics to try. I think from Shirley, she's really busy, but she's here, which is great.
How about we just jump into a couple of tactics then, because I think that's really important.
So. Yeah.
I'm going to share just one that I have used. So for me, the most important thing as a change practitioner, wherever in the world you practice, whoever are your audiences, your stakeholders, your peers, and so on, the most important thing is that you as a practitioner, as a change practitioner, and as a human being with integrity, need to learn to adapt and connect. Well, what does that look like? That sounds like some kind of, abstract construct. But adapting and connecting is really about asking people what works for them. And so I think someone right at the beginning talked about, when things slow down. But in actual fact, if you start slow, your momentum will build up because people will be with you. And so whenever I have the opportunity, whether I'm working right from the beginning on an initiative, or even if I have to jump in because things are a bit messy and not working well, the very first question I ask is, how do you best like to be communicated with? What is your style? How, do you like things broken up into small pieces? Do you want to see the entire picture? Because again, there's both cultural and individual differences for that. And to really try and figure out how my communication and the way I present and engage with people meets them in a way that doesn't feel stressful for them. Because change, let's face it, change can be pretty stressful. And there is a lot of change in all our organizations. And we hear all over the world this term change saturation. But I personally feel that at the minute a human being feels that they are being respected for being human, the door starts to open. It makes it easier to start connecting. It makes it easier to allow for a conversation to develop. It might not develop very quickly. I know when I've been working also, as I said, with people in Africa, it takes a little while. It might be 2 or 3 touch points, but eventually once the door is open, then we get this start of a conversation that is going to really be meaningful. So that's the first thing that is so important to me, is about adapting and connecting. So Mei Wai, what are your reflections on, because you are so multicultural, on adapting and connecting across cultures?
I think what you say is absolutely relevant, Ursula. But just to kind of build on that, I think something that works is I use something called a cognitive behavioral technique that I actually picked up from INSEAD, right? And what happens is that, you see, when you're having that conversation that I was talking about earlier, that's so important and you were mentioning, the parties who are resistant to change would tend to actually believe that their behavior is correct and the other party is not right, right? Whether it's the leaders or the organization, etc. So the key thing is that what they actually sometimes do is that they equate a certain thing and they respond immediately. And you have to break that cycle. Example, I give you a very obvious one. AI, oh, lose my job. That kind of thing. So what you want to do is use that style of questioning so that you break the cycle of these arbitrary interpretations that they have. And then from here, they will say, oh, I see. Yes, actually, it's not logical. Okay, maybe. Sometimes they answer themselves again and they say, maybe not. Do you think it is? No, maybe not. And then get them into this logical, factual framework, and everybody is capable of that, especially if you are already doing what you have said, which is treating them with respect, sitting down with them. This is something that would tend to work, I would say, across
I love
cultures,
that.
but you have put in a lot of time behind that. Yeah. So just kind
The
of weakening the
interesting thing-
link. Yeah.
The interesting thing about that sort of CBT-based approach, which is really based in questioning. And
Yes.
so what I have learned as well is when we're in a group, so let's say it's a whole team of people and you're introducing a change, the whole responsibility for the questions doesn't actually have to be necessarily on one person. So on you or me, for example,
Yeah.
or anyone who's on this call. When we start demonstrating and role modeling that, peers will actually question each other, which is also a really good thing. So I have seen that work incredibly well, and changing it to just being a conversation between the person with more authority and less authority to more being a conversation amongst peers. And I've experienced that also very successfully working with my colleagues in Asia. I also saw someone popped in a question about the generations. And, this is another nuance which I find interesting. Personally, I don't get too caught up in generational aspects. But the one thing I love about the younger generations, and I really try to embrace this myself every single day, is curiosity. I think the younger generations, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, all of those, probably anybody under the age of 40, tends to be a little bit more curious and questioning. And I never want to assume that that questioning is coming from a place of resistance. I really want to say questioning is part of being a resilient person in change. But or I should maybe say, and I have met some senior leaders who literally have said, I don't want to hear any more questions from people. And so for me, the resistant person is that senior leader. So my work, then I shift my focus to working with the leader and about adapting and connecting and so on, versus the impacted people, because I think questioning is so powerful and so important. However, there's one small caveat. There is also a tendency for people who are not resistant to a particular change, but for people who just feel contrary, feel at odds with everything because they may not be happy in their role. And we've all met people like that. Those people will maybe use questions to unsettle everyone else. And the type of way they do that is they'll ask a question and then they will then go to their peers and ask, say to me, they might ask the question to me, I'll answer. then when I'm out of the room or out of earshot, they'll go to their peers and they'll ask the same question. And they'll say, Ursula's answer wasn't really good. What do you think? And so they start causing a little bit of a disruptive feeling. And I have seen that at play. So this is another reason why, to your point, Mei Wai, we have to be so observant. But I always just like to say, overall, I think questions are really positive, and I always invite them. And if someone asks a question, you know, for the third or fourth time, I will also say, we've spoken about this, and I'd like to understand why my answer isn't sitting well with you. So I put the question back on the person, because sometimes I had this experience actually working with a multinational where I had some team members from Sri Lanka, from India, from Vietnam, and then a lot of people from Europe. And one of the people, I think from Sri Lanka, was asking the same question. So when I put it back and I said, look, I like to understand why this question is not sitting well with you. And you can think about it. I don't want to put you on the spot. You know, you can think about it. You can answer me privately, however. And this individual was waiting for that opening. And the answer was, that leader who sat in France has no idea what they're doing, and none of us trust that person. So again, you know, it's around about unpacking and trying to get to a place to figure out what's going on without making assumptions. So that's an
Yeah,
example.
Ursula, I think you raised something just as well about role, and role is really important to be prepared to communicate to. And there have been situations also whereby people feel resistant to change. And if you look at it holistically and go back and redefine their role, I think I saw a question there about people expecting change people to do a certain thing, etc. Right? If you redefine the role clearly and say, okay, in this process, change process, you are going to be in charge of this, and post that, you'll be surprised how many things can shift based on that clarity of communication. Yes.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really true. Mei Wai, I think we should probably open up for some
Ask some
questions.
questions. Yeah.
I think that would be
Let's
great. So for
get
those of you
someone to
did,
speak.
throw some questions at us.
You can turn on your mic.
Yeah, absolutely. You can either type it in or you can put your hand up and unmute yourself.
Or
Okay,
we
here's
could
a question for me. How do you deal with the comment about not having confidence in the leader? Well, that is a very, very good question. And I will tell you, I've dealt with it more than once. So for the example I gave you, I asked, why do you not have confidence in the leader? And we had a really quite long conversation in two parts about that. So what I learned from that was a lot of history about things that had happened in change before in the organization that had not gone well. And the other thing is I learned some of the things that people felt about that leader and his personal approach to people. So his interpersonal skills, had a tendency not to listen to people, or, you know, would say, I'm available for office hours and so on, would take questions and then just would not respond. So I was able to say then, you know, completely anonymously, I'm going to take these back to that leader, some of these things, because most leaders want to grow and do a better job. So what I said is, I cannot promise you it's going to change. I cannot promise you it's going to change quickly, but let me take that back and see. So awareness is there. And then I said, the other thing that we can do is figure out how to have a go-between. So let's pick a person who could be like a functional rep or a change ambassador that we can personally introduce to that leader. So we would create a human bridge between that leader who wasn't doing things in the best possible way and everyone else. So that was one of the examples. The other one I will give is my own personal example where I was impacted. I was leading up a major transformation in a supply chain. And I had a group of about 6,000 stakeholders who, and none of them were Asian. This was all in Canada, but I was very surprised by this. None of them would really say anything about the change. They did their training, they came to the workshops on the process, and they seemed to be speaking very knowledgeably and comfortably about it. But when we actually came to making the switch, nothing was happening. And so I took it upon myself to go and do some personal meetings and so on. And they were a little bit rude to me, quite frankly. They, you're a woman, you're in this big DC, what do you know about this? We're tough guys, etc. But at least they invited me to have a conversation. And when I was driving back about an hour and a half from that meeting, I was trying to figure out what was at stake. And I don't know where this inspiration came from, but all of a sudden I thought to myself, I'm wondering if I am guilty by association. So I have put myself in the space of that human bridge, but I haven't really figured out what's going on with the leader. So as soon as I got back to the office, I phoned the manager of the distribution center and I said to him, I have a question for you, and you can, you may choose not to answer it. That's your prerogative. But am I guilty by association? And he started to laugh. And he said, I'm sorry for laughing. But he said that, and he mentioned the person, the vice president. He said, he is such an obnoxious, toxic person. Now, I hadn't seen this because I was only working on the change side. I hadn't seen what was happening really in day-to-day operations. And because I was seen as the spokesperson for that VP, I had then been assumed to be not trustworthy. And so the minute he laughed, I laughed and I said, okay, well, at least we now know what the problem is. What can I do differently? And I got some really good feedback. And so we ended up working incredibly well. And that DC wowed everybody because we made the change really well. But I had to actually go around the VP, and that was not comfortable for me, but it was worth it for those 6,000 colleagues. Great question.
That's a lovely story.
Great answer.
Thank you.
And just curious, when in the first example, when the person did share that they didn't have confidence in the leader, I think you said in the first row, the leader wasn't there in that that was a different time, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Very insightful.
No problem.
Thank you.
Let's see what.
This is a question that many people ask here around people in their comfort zone. That is not easy to drive them to change.
Do you want to have a crack at doing that, Mei Wai?
Yeah, I have a crack at that, and I can even use the example here in Singapore, right, where people were not also that many of the smaller firms may not have been so keen on digitalizing until COVID started. But the key thing here is that it's often harder to get them to make that change at the point where they can't see what the disaster would be if they don't change. So people tend to change faster when there's a burning platform, but the cost is very high. So I think one of the key things is there must be a way to share with them, what if you don't change? What would happen to the organization? And I think we know a lot of those stories, right? The Motorola and all the Nokia stories and all that. And this was in fact the thing. And I'm sure many of us, or at least I hear many people telling me the same, which is that they deal with people who say, we used to be the leader. Don't tell us to change now, right? So I hope I've answered your question. There's someone here.
I think we've got someone with a raised hand.
Raise the hand.
That's me.
Raised hand. I can't
Yes,
see.
go ahead.
Yes, hi. Hi, Mei Wai.
Hi.
Hi, Ursula. This is Mukund. I'm a HR professional myself, and I've been in Singapore for the last 17 years. I worked with IBM for 10 years in HR. So one thing that's probably you can call it as a school of thought also is like about change management. What are we changing actually? Because most of the time the thought is like, okay, there is a change manager coming in, and then he's going to manage change in the organization, he or she, and then it's about managing the change in the process, etc. But my observations has always been that we were just Ursula was just talking about how the younger generations react to change, or the way they ask their questions is about probably trying to make things simple because they feel like it doesn't make logic when they see a lot of people doing many years the same thing without being questioning, not disrupting, probably is the right word. So question is about like, are we talking about the importance of change management in the mindset of people rather than the processes or the way a company, probably even a culture, etc., works? So how do you see that mindset being coming into this aspect of change management?
All right, I'll take a crack at it. That's a really big question with a lot of nuances. I'm going to just try and tie it a little bit back also to the role resistance plays. So honestly, we cannot manage change. Our profession has a really wrong name. We can manage the change process, but we cannot make people change. So for me, the work that I do is about inviting people to examine their current mindset, the current way they do things, and try to see the value in doing it differently. So that's how, as a practitioner, that's the filter I have always used. And I'm still in change management after 35 years. So despite the fact that the profession probably doesn't have exactly the right name, the work that we do is really, really important. I think in organizations who take a more human-centered approach to change, with every project where you have a change manager on board and you are trying to create a journey to help people move from today to tomorrow and help them understand their current mindset and try to embrace new values, new way of working, etc. When we do that work really well with a very human-centered approach, what we end up with is an organization more able to take change on. And then the complications, let me just say that's not the right word at all, or the complexity about a human-centered approach is we have cultural differences. We have organizations. I mean, I've worked for some companies that when I think about it now, if I was to try and create sort of a visualization of them, it would really look messy because we've got so many companies that are acquired by mergers and then, acquisitions, and pieces have been split off and things shift around all the time. And so culturally, there's those aspects too, because there's the culture tone is very often set by the leaders. So those complexities, I think, should not scare us away. For me, the most fundamental thing is change happens one conversation at a time. And we can't have individual conversations with everybody, although that would be really wonderful. So how do we create the conditions that people feel they are in a conversation while change is happening, that they feel safe, that they feel trusted, they can reach out to the change manager, they can reach out to their people leader, they can reach out to their HRBP. So we need to all be linked up as well. When we've got a shared desire to see change emerge, we need to be linked up. And so I will share perfectly openly, I think it's a topic maybe for another conversation, that sometimes when I've tried to create those collaborative coalitions to address large-scale change and transformation in organizations, I've actually met with resistance because, for example, HR thinks they know the way to do it. This group thinks they know the way to do it. Sometimes it's like, we just need communication. So I love your question. I really love it. And I think we definitely could make a whole other conversation about that, a whole other session. Thank you, Makan, for that one.
I just wanted to add, Ursula, thank you so much, and Makun for your question. And I see the debate going on the chat. I just have one thought that I wanted to throw out, which is that perhaps one day, or in fact now, all leaders should need to, whether you're HR, right? Finance, production, everything, you should actually embrace the ability to manage that change and the mindset as well. The change specialist can come in to help you, but I believe all leaders in the company or managers even should have that. And in fact, in Singapore, you can see the ranking there. Change management is very high in terms, right, Makun, on the percentage that is required now in organizations. And there was a shift. Previously, it wasn't there.
Well, just on that point, just that you mentioned about the business leaders, right? One supplementary question to that: how much of importance does the business actually take over change? For example, like there is a situation where like a sales is happening, and then that's bringing directly revenue to the company, and then you go and say, no, there is a change happening, and then they tell you, shun you, saying, no, the sale is important more than change. You can come later. You have that conflict going.
I think the short answer to that, Makand, is you have to look beyond. You have to look beyond the immediate horizon. So the sale is important, but the and is important as well. And making the sale today and losing the company tomorrow, what's the trade-off? So it's a really big question as well. And I think that would be my short answer to that. But that's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think that's a super question. I am aware of the fact Martin's been waiting with his hand up for a while. So Martin, we'll go to you next.
Thank you so much, and hello from Switzerland. So I just want to refer also to a comment, I believe, from me and Rachel. When we join as change managers, we often hear from the people, this is the 5th or 6th change management program. We had previously different ones, right? So I don't feel that people are resistant to change, but they are resistant to this kind of, it hasn't been implemented previously properly. Now, what are you now going to do about it? Because when we join, we don't look at the legacy, we just hear it in the workshops. That my experience is that people are very open to change, but they say, look, the last change program has not been implemented properly. Now management has decided this new program, and are you really sure you want to implement this? Because the last one wasn't implemented, and we are so fed up with it. And another example is when I joined in a client project, they said, oh, you are the 7th change manager and your predecessor we just fired 3 weeks ago. But I joined on a green field, but it's not a green field. It has been ongoing for the last 10 years. So how would you address this kind of resistance?
Mei Wai, do you want to have a go at that?
Actually, I think what he mentions is quite relevant, not this kind of a topic, but more like you also get people who talk to you and tell you like, we've tried with this team before. What are you going to do that's different? It's kind of similar, right? In this case, I think very important is we got to listen.
Yeah.
Because I faced this one time in Shanghai, and the guy was very unhappy and he rattled on. I think I counted, it was for like 40 minutes about what he experienced and what went wrong and this. And I patiently just listened, took notes, went through, because I think it's critical to find out at that moment rather than feel like, oh, this is a personal attack or what, right? But more like, okay, I think you mentioned like, I can't recall 7 times or something, people in front of you. Maybe you are the one who's going to make it work. You are meant for them. So you need to hear what they are going to complain about. What are the issues? What joining the dots? Was it something that truly it wasn't done well? Right? No finger pointings, everything. Very open. And what is it from yourself that you think, okay, now that I know the current situation, right? I kind of audited what he said. Let me find out from the rest as well. And then you can kind of get a picture of what the issues were. And then from there, I believe you would be able to say, can you value add in these areas, or were they unreasonable? They're expecting some kind of crazy transformation change that is not manageable, for example, right? So I think this is a situation that is so useful because it's not just in change management, but in situations where when we are consulting companies and they are, you know, I've heard people even who join, who doing R&D and all that, and they are being told like, no, why should we do it? We tried 10 times. It's failed. Why should we do it again? They are like numb, you know, to it. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm answering you. Maybe
I think that's a
Ursula can
great
say
answer,
something.
really a good answer, Mei Wai. And the one thing I would add is it took me personally in my practice quite some time before I was confident enough in those situations to ask people, and what would you do this time? Because so often we miss the pure gold of what people have seen, observed, lived through, and they might have great answers. They might not be in the right position. They might not have the authority, the resources, and so on to enact those approaches. But people know what is going to work. They've been there, they've lived it. They know where the challenging spots are. They know where the bright spots are. But I perfectly honestly, you know, earlier in my career as a change practitioner, I was too anxious to ask those questions because I thought, well, what if they tell me something that's not on my plan? Now I don't make a plan till I've asked those questions. So thank you. That's wonderful, Martin. I think with time, we're almost at time. I see Shilpi's had her hand up for a while as well. So Shilpi, if you can do a 45-second, what is your question? We would love to hear from you.
I think you don't have to answer now, by the way, but Ursula, I've had the conversation with you. I think my question is more around not just internal organization. How do you bring change in a services organization where you're facing client and you would like client? So you're trying to bring the change on the client side because that works for you. But we can have that conversation separately. I think it's a big topic in itself.
It is a big topic, and maybe that's another really good topic for a session like this, because Mei Wai has a lot of experience in that, and I do know some of the other colleagues from APAC as well. So I'm going to put a pin in that, Shilpi, because I think you've just given us an agenda item possibly for the new year. Great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpi. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
I think
Ursula, you know,
time, Mei Wai. I can't believe
flies.
it.
Time flies. And, you know, as I sit here listening to all this discussion, I'm just amazed, right, that here we are, a group from all over the world. I saw someone was from Costa Rica. Hello. Right, really far away from us as well. And it's a universal topic that all of us are facing, no matter where we are. And clearly with the acceleration of change, we really, as I mentioned, have to challenge ourselves to say, how can we enable ourselves, whether we are in change or not, okay, to apply that in our life as well as our work. Right? So as you can see, it's very multi-dimensional, and we have to keep tuning ourselves, learning. And like Ursula says, don't go like prepared with a script, you know, just flow with it, right? Like Michelle Yeoh says, just flow with it. And then really be in that moment, listening and caring about the people. So with that, I wanted to thank all of you. You've been really wonderful audience, as well as Ursula, our co-host, and all the friends in Issoria group, especially Jennifer, and also Hui Zhi also, who is also chipped in to help out. Thank you very much. I hope you had a great session, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And the output from this session will be hitting your inbox pretty soon. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.